we're going to open it up for discussion and Q&A. If anybody has a question, I'm going to bring the mic.
My name is Michael Malutis. I'm from CAI. I have a question for Brian.
Yes.
Brian, you talked about, I understand you work with a lot of CIOs, and you talked about the skills gap, and you were talking in particular about data analytics and data science, and about this need that the CIOs have and that they face. To what extent do you feel that there's actually not so much a skills gap as a corporate training gap? And when you talk about the gap between what universities and what people are learning and the needs of these corporations, I mean, to some extent, hasn't that always been the case? And isn't the market always moving too fast for the school system to keep up? And isn't it, to some extent, the responsibility of corporations to take that on themselves? And do you hear that sentiment at all from the CIOs that you work with, that they are working to internalize this sort of training? And in the old days, this was actually more common than it is now, this idea of this sort of vertically integrated company where the training was continuous. And do you see that in your conversations, and is that being put forward as a possible solution to this problem?
It's a tough one, right? Because, I mean, it's kind of apples to oranges in a lot of cases, or the things have changed over time. When it comes to training for specific technologies, some technologies take hold faster than others. Some technologies move from emerging to legacy rather quickly, right? As a lot of people say today, the minute that they're put into your production, they're legacy. That's not the way that people used to think about it, but how rapidly things are evolving today, it is a little different. So do I think that corporations need to sort of take over a lot of that training? It's a tough call, right? In some cases, they will have the expertise to do that. In some cases, they won't. In some cases, if something is new as, or newish as data science, if they don't have the knowledge inside their company, they can't train people to do it. But what's interesting is they can train people to do it the way that they need, that the company needs them to do it. So there's the augmentation of that, which I think is interesting. You're seeing a lot of different things to your question. Am I hearing this from CIOs? And I would say that it's not, bubbling up to the surface as far as being, number one or number two, but this is a subset of maybe like number three. And I think what's interesting is looking at the different opportunities that are out there today, the sort of expansion of opportunities, like all these different MOOCs that are out there, a lot of different other educational companies that have made great breakthroughs, the Udacities of the world and Singularity, and some others that I think are presenting some different ways for people to learn that I think are interesting, I think are being put to use really nicely, are being customized or adapted for specific enterprise purposes in a lot of different ways. Certifications obviously is going to go a long way to that. But yeah, it's a constant struggle of what technology is going to be important. Therefore, where is a St. John's going to devote the time and energy to build a master's degree program, or even other universities or other institutions creating certification programs. It's tough. It's been a challenge. It's going to continue to be a challenge. If the rate of innovation continues at breakneck pace, nobody can keep up. That's one of the most interesting things I've heard from CIOs too, is you talk about how fast things are evolving. One of the first realizations you have to have is that you can't keep track of everything. Right. So it is what it is. If you miss out on, you can't keep track of, 5 out of the 10 technologies that are deemed to be hot by Gartner or somebody else, oh well, that's what it is. So in a lot of cases, it's going to become selective, and it's going to be very different for different organizations at different times and different points in their maturity.
Joe, your thoughts?
Yeah, just looking at it from the university side, our goal is to teach students how to learn. We're not a product shop. Yes, we want them to have the skills in whether it's data analytics or mobile development or web development, and we do that. But the programs are intended to build the whole person. And I think as a corporation, you want that. Because if a person comes in and knows how to be, let's bring out the word, a COBOL programmer, we just talked about we want people in the C-suite to be able to do more than just sit there writing programs. We want them to be part of the business. So I think you have to look at it that way. Another thing many of these technologies start in university research, and that's where they come from. So the universities I think we're doing our job, not to be defensive, but I think we're doing our job, and I think there's a balance. And as the technology takes hold, clearly you want to incorporate that as part of that degree, that program. I mean, you look at the sciences, you look at it, particularly for us, like say pharmacy. You have to, the students that graduate the pharmacy program know how to work in a pharmacy. But what are they? At heart, they're pharmacists. They're not fulfilling prescriptions. They're pharmacists. They know what they are. They know how to use them. They know when they're applicable. So I think there's an important balance there. And the other thing that Brian said was that, and I think we all know that, the technology changes every day. Web development was such a big area for how many years, and people aren't even talking about it anymore. Remember, what was it, Web 2.0? You don't even see that word anymore. And everybody was looking for, whether it was resumes or classes, are they Web 2.0? It's gone. Now, it's IE, Internet of Everything. So that'll continue to change, and that's what we try to do.
My name is Jason Wisdom. I'm with KPMG, and one thing that you guys mentioned is adding value to the business. This is a topic I've heard talked about for about 10 years. What does it look like? A couple of use cases were given. I guess more importantly, who really drives it? Is it the CIO that drives it, or is the CIO kind of like just sort of a reconciliation between the business and the tech gap? I've seen chief marketing officers taking increased role in driving analytics. Just how does the CIO, who drives business value? Who decides what that is?
I have a cool story on that, actually. I was at a course about 5 years ago, and there's the CIO for Coke bottling. So Coca-Cola bottling, right? Pretty, you're putting sugar water in cans. Fascinating guy, though. So he came up with the idea of replacing all of one grocery store's POS systems so that he could track exactly when and where his stuff was sold, if it was on an end cap, if it sold better. And he did that across 100 different companies, 100 different stores. Made their sales go up. I can't remember the number, I don't want to make it up, but it was significant, and it was something that put him right in the middle of strategic value creation. So I think when you think about that story, who else would do that? I don't know. I mean, to me, it seems like I understand the technology, I understand the business, I understand what can come out of this. Let's go make a calculated bet and make that happen. So I think, to the point of Union Pacific, what's the point of having all those sensors all over the tracks? There's a whole lot of reasons I can think of, and I am not a railroad-ish kind of person. Fascinating, though, but I think that's where I look at it, is it's not, I wish it was formulaic. I really do. I think you can look at ways of looking at the business and say, okay, here are the top 10 things we identified as maybe areas we can work on. But how in the world do you come up with, replace their POS systems and translate that into sales? I mean, that's freaking genius, honestly. So I think it's sort of that chief innovation officer combined with knowing what's out there. And if you miss 5 things but you hit 1, you're in pretty good shape. So I agree. I think it's kind of a BS term, honestly, because it's hard to really quantify it. But that's when I think of what value a CIO can bring. I think about that story every single time.
I think if you're thinking about it, I think the original question was kind of like, where does it start, and what role does the CIO play in it? Or let me just seize on those for a second. I think what's really important is it used to be largely, or it used to be predominantly, that the CIO was on the receiving end, right? Which gave the word, or gave the terminology of order taker culture, to IT, right? So the business was instructing IT what to do. IT was brought to the table after the strategic decisions had been made, and were basically just left to kind of decide, okay, how are we going to implement all of this? What has to happen now is it has to be a collaboration, right? It has to be the strategic piece of it. Those upfront conversations need to be a strategic collaboration. CIOs need to be more proactive about approaching their business partners first and getting to a point where they're starting to anticipate. And this is a tough one, but they have to get to the point where they anticipate the needs of the business before the business thinks of them. That's where you want to be. That's the sweet spot, right? So you want to be able to say, you want to be able to go in to the business and say, I've got an idea. And you're not just saying it because it's some cool technology interesting, innovative thinking because technology for technology's sake,
Right.
but it's about something having to do with the balance sheet, something having to do with the P&L, demonstrating your understanding of, of the business, your financial acumen, and your ability to bring the technology for that to bear. If you can proactively go out and do that to your business partners, you're in a good spot.
Fred Schweizer, CAI, and your sponsor today. Question I have on I think, Randy, you said there might be 600,000 job openings, right? So part of that could be a skills gap. Part of it could be a volume challenge, right?
Yep.
And on the volume side, we've talked a lot about skills, but on the volume side, are we motivating enough people to get into this field of whatever you want to call it, whether it's IT or whether it's business value or technology, whatever you want to call it? Are we motivating enough people and sending enough people? And if not, what do we need to change, either the university system or in the industry, in order to motivate more people in?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I was going to respond the same way on the volume side. We're not bringing enough people in, and like I mentioned earlier, with the baby boomer retirement, that is a serious problem. And I can't remember how many people are going to retire in the next 5 years that are going to impact all industries, but technology specifically, because there's so many legacy systems out there that are going to be unsupported. So people are going to be working until their 80s, making double time because we have to pay them. I think in terms of attracting talent, like I spoke of earlier, what we found, we're not sure if it's completely valid yet or not, is getting people individually engaged with individuals that said, this is why technology is a good place to be. I mean, it's well-paying, it's stable, it's probably not as sexy as it used to be maybe 15 years ago, where it's like, yeah, this is something really neat and cool, which blows my mind. You get a lot of push still in the software engineer side and the development role, but there's a wide suite of things. And at the other side of it, being a data scientist is not easy. I mean, you actually have to be very well trained and talented in order to pull that off. So there's only so many people out there that are going to be amenable to that. There's only so many people that can code really well. But there's a lot of other positions that I think collectively we have to be better and say, this is everything you can do. If we can figure out a way as an industry to pull those people together and put mentors with them, I really think that's going to work, because what we saw from both parents and from students is they were overwhelmed with career information. They're overwhelmed with all the different things they can do, and if they're able to add a real personal experience to that and say, this is what this looks like, then I think you're able to get a better chance with these kids to say, yeah, that is actually something that I'm willing to do. You've also got demographic shifts with millennials. You've got a shifting racial balance. You've got many different factors that are going into this. That it's kind of like when I was growing up. I mean, even athletes were still, everyone wants to be an athlete, a singer, or whatever. The studies we've seen, it's even worse than it's been. It's bad in terms of shifting things away from actual real work. So, not to denigrate the other side, but yeah, I think that's really the issue, is trying to pull it in. That's what we found so far. I sure as hell hope it works.
So, again, on the university side, and I'm sure you've seen it in the press, there's a big push on, obviously the buzzword is STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And that's across the country, because there is a recognition, are enough people going into these fields to meet the needs that we currently have. You saw it, it's not a political statement. There was it 2 years ago, the president wrote his first line of code in the White House during what I think they call it Computer Week, and it garnered a lot of attention. So there is a recognition at the education level. And it's now, actually, it's even more prominent in K through 12, particularly the high schools. There's not very many high schools that don't have some kind of computer-based training, whether it be programming or something else in that area that they are doing. And we're finding that as those students come into college.
Joe, just a quick follow-up. Randy had mentioned the gender gap, 70-30%. At least in the workforce, are you seeing more women enter STEM courses, looking at STEM degrees at the university level?
Yes, we are. And in fact, we have a number of programs in those areas. We recognize the Women in Technology annually at the university, and they get to discuss it, and make it available. So they try to reach the other students that may be in programs that are not technology-based. Another thing we're seeing a lot of is we talk about data scientists. Students that are in different majors, whatever they are taking the data analytics classes. Because they know when they get a job in whatever field it is, including history, they are going to be asked to do things in these areas, especially at an entry-level position, right? What do we all do? You know, we ask someone and say, can you look this up? Can you get us the information on X, Y, Z? And it's all computer-based, and so that is growing.
Hi, hello. My name is Bob Barone. I'm with St. John's University, and this question is going to be directed at NetCom and at CompTIA. We've been talking today, well, actually, I want to extend something that Joe talked about, and this is beyond technology, getting to the human element. We talked today about IoT technology and the sensors, and then the need for speed to move that information from point A to point B that ends up at some endpoint, like mobile devices and computers and those kinds of things. But once we get there, the human element comes in. How do we move all that information and I guess I should say technology begets technology. And when we get to those endpoints now, Joe had mentioned data mining and predictive analytics, a graduate program at St. John's. And that's newer technology. Now we need to close the loop. We have all this information. We have all this data. We've made some sense out of it. Now we have to react to it. And I'm looking at NetCom and CompTIA, is how do we teach the human being to speed up thought, to speed up decision making? And one of the things that we're looking at St. John's is simulators. And I'd like to hear what CompTIA and NetCom, what their thinking is in that technology.
It's a great question there. I think a lot of this stems back to the rate of technology change and how much amount of information that comes in as technology is changing. So I think we talked about data science track a few different times here. We have a data science track that we have put together. It's almost a 4-month-long program, which comprises everything from the beginning of data science, data foundations, looking at tools like Excel or Power BI, going into more statistical analysis, building into R or Python training languages, programming languages to extract data. And then as I think Brian and Randy were saying earlier, about how not to just to dig the data through, how to use information out of it. Right, so that program by itself is a pretty long program. Now, there's similar programs, as technology keeps on evolving and the rate of change is so fast, how much can you keep on learning? So that's when we go back to and kind of answer your question. It's about how do we really ingrain an inquisitive mindset in people? Because that's what learning is all about. It's not about, okay, this technology you can learn for maybe 4 months, 6 months, and then you can apply that for maybe a couple of years, and then something already changes. There was a discussion I was listening to at one point. They were talking about technology implementations in San Jose, in California, and how they had this problem on highways where they had all this graffiti that people were putting up. And application of new technology was they had created these drones that would go out, and instead of blocking the highway completely and stopping the highway, stopping the traffic, these drones would go out and clean all the graffiti. And the next follow-up question was, okay, what are you going to do with drones that will come back out and start putting graffiti? Because right now we're just looking at people who are putting graffiti and you're using technology to clean it, but technology can also disable that. So it's an always evolving chain. I think the basic answer to your question, I would think, is how do we really instill that sense of always learning, constantly learning? And that goes back to the purpose that NetCom has. That's what we really try to promote. It's not about technology, it's not about tools. Yes, technology is an enabler for business, but again, that keeps on changing on a regular basis. So I think from our perspective, it's more about how do we really instill that sense of continuous learning.
The simulation piece, I think, is a big one. I agree with you. It's the more that we do that, the better outcomes we get. So, is it learning faster? I think if you flip it around, it's if you've got the fundamentals, you're able to react quicker. And so I think from a certification perspective, we want to make sure people really know their stuff. And if they don't, then we failed. And so when we added simulations in there, It's interesting. I mean, the certification business is always fighting against cheating. We're always fighting against a number of things. Simulations, pretty hard to cheat on. I mean, you kind of have to know what you're doing. And it's been interesting to watch that evolve and see the more that we add, the higher quality results we get. We're also gotten a little bit in the training side of things with an adaptive learning product that seems to have been, it's more of an add-on to training that the NetCom may do that's sort of a refresher and sort of like a practice testing, but really helping people make sure that they know the fundamental concepts. I think that's the only way you make them faster is if they've got that. If you and I agree that IoT, you need to know these 10 things, you really want that person to know those 10 things, and then you can build from there. I mean, it's kind of like any of us. If you know something, Brian knows far more than I do, he's building on top of that, but he can get that information faster simply because he's got the experience. I mean, it's a simplistic answer, but that's kind of how I view it.
Gentlemen, first of all, thank you very much for your comments. Very insightful. Ed Ebenick with ProWise Solutions. First of all, a comment. I guess I had the good fortune of growing up in a day and age when Accenture was building their own and doing their own chip implants. I had the good fortune of being with CGI when they were building data centers and facilities in these obscure parts of the world and the points of Virginia and so on in order to leverage universities and deliver skills and capabilities. And I'm a strong proponent of lifelong contributing through lifelong learning. Now, to my question. Several times I've heard social, several times I've heard mobile, several times analytics, a little bit about cloud. What I'm seeing and what we're seeing as an organization is the chief marketing officer is doing the social stuff. There are some really bright guys dealing with the data and coming up with some interesting insights. There are some other kind of young, innovative people doing the stuff on mobile. And there's some more traditional guys going, what should we be doing with the data center and the cloud? I don't see them, we don't see them as being really integrated and tied to what's that business strategy to say, where are we taking the organization? Not to fear disruption, but to be the disruptor.
That's Tuesday for me. I mean, that's I struggle with that a lot. I think bringing in applications, rogue IT or whatever it is, bringing that stuff in, I don't fight it that much because there does end up being business value. What I found though is that when those apps are coming in, that's a lot of where IT comes in and says, oh, you would like that integrated now. Oh, that's interesting. Let's think about what that actually implies. And then you add the cloud on top of that, and what that means to me means something very different to marketing. And trying to pull all those together, I think that's a nonstop battle. I haven't figured that out yet. I don't know if other CIOs have. Perhaps I could be stronger in that. But yeah, I think the only way I figured out a way around that is knowing what's going on with the marketing and knowing when I can have an opportunity and stepping in. Past that, it's a tough one because you can deploy something within 2 seconds. I mean, they could have a new app. I mean, they could just go buy it and that's that. And am I going to be that guy that stops them? Probably not. But unless they're touching my data in a way that I don't like. But if they're bringing in customer tweets and all that, all right, am I okay with that being its own little silo? Probably. As much as I hate saying it.
I agree with what you're saying. Sorry, just deal with my voice for the time being. All those things, social, mobile, analytics, and cloud, that's sort of the classic definition of digital, right? Or at least the way that a lot of people are referring to it today. They all didn't come on the scene at the same time. And they all didn't, gain a lot of deep penetration in organizations at the same time. Therefore, yeah, it's going to be all over the place. I think what I hear a lot is what Randy's saying, that it is a constant struggle to figure out how do you bring that all under one roof, right? And how do you kind of keep that all flowing in one direction with a clear business goal in mind? One of the answers to doing this was was the chief digital officer, right? So it was a couple of years ago, Gartner was saying that some gigantic number of companies were going to hire a chief digital officer, have a chief digital officer by the end of that year. Well, it didn't happen. It plateaued. We see a lot of companies that do have a chief digital officer. We see a lot of companies that have a chief digital officer yet not holding the title of chief digital officer. In some cases, they report to the CIO. In some cases, they report to a CEO. In some cases, they report to a CMO. That needs to get figured out first, right? You need to, from a structural perspective. And it's going to be different in a lot of different places. There's consumer-facing companies where digital means something very, very different than a B2B company. And in a lot of cases, a lot of what's going on in that is going to be driven by marketing, or marketing is going to be the executive sponsor of. In a lot of cases, it's not going to be. So it's not the easiest thing to answer per se, as far as what is going on out there. But I will say that I do hear a large number of CIOs who are talking about this, this is a very big strategic priority for them, whether it's reining it in or whether it's setting the strategy, taking hold of the strategy, and socializing that and collaborating with the rest of the C-suite. It's a big issue. It's definitely a big issue today.
And Petro, GNet Solutions. Brian, you may have a chapter in your book that touches on this, but the question is for Randy. You mentioned in your last answer that a business unit will go out and deploy an app to reach a business function for them. As CIOs, and this goes to the rest of the people in the room, do you find that once they realize they've gone down this rabbit hole and it's either causing them more problems, do they dump it on the CIO to say, fix it, you're the CIO, even though you had no planning part of it, and you now have to go back and fix it? So
It's interesting. I think that happened probably more often 5 years ago than it does now, because we did run into that. And it was one of our CRM systems. They just went and did it, and we found out about it. Like, what are you doing? So they dealt with pain for 5 years until they finally realized, yeah, we might want to rethink that. And now, like I was saying with media and marketing all the time, I'm trying to not necessarily avoid that, but say, what are you guys really trying to do here? And that's helped it. But yeah, they dealt with that themselves, and they did themselves a disservice. I felt bad, but I couldn't rip it out because it's just not the kind of organization I want to run. If that's really what they want to try, as long as the data is protected and I can get at it in some way, all right, give it a shot. But yeah, we really try to get ahead of those systems as much as we can now. And we're doing much better than we used to. Before it was just chaos. And now I feel pretty confident that when something goes in, I know about it, I'm ready to react to it, and I can add things to it as I need to. So, yeah.
Just very briefly, I think it's still prominent because of two things. The availability of these systems at a very low level, that organizations see a solution, they think they could go out and get it, and there's no impact to the rest of the organization. And the other part of that is, previously you had to bring all of that software in-house. Now most of the sales that are being made are hosted systems. So it really complicates the matter. I think as we're discussing, you don't want to be the black hat in the situation, but ultimately you're held responsible if that system causes a problem.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Great questions, great responses.